How's it going, M's fans? Yeah, we got to talk about some things here because it is an off day, the rare off day when it comes to the Mariners, and it was the first in 17 days, right? And so maybe by the time you're watching this, the series with the Yankees will have unfolded, and it's important that we mention that's when we're recording this, the Monday before the Yankee series, July 7th, because the trade deadline is coming up. It is the 31st, and as we've seen in years past, you can get moves on that day. You can get moves. That was the Seawall trade in 23. You can get moves a few days ahead of it, like we saw with the Randy Arozarena trade last year. And so we're going to spend this off day, since we don't have a game to watch, since we don't have Cal Raleigh home runs to watch, at least for one night, we're going to talk about the trade deadline and what's to come. Call it your trade deadline primer, because the reality here is this. You can lament, if you'd like, the way things have been done from the front office of the Mariners. I mean, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But one thing that is undeniable is that in the last 4 years, they have made significant moves ahead of the trade deadline. I want to bring you up this, and we'll talk about that. And that's why we're talking about the potential moves at this point. We'll get into the specifics of that, the most likely candidates, and a lot of it you may have heard already, but we're going to talk a little bit more about why the Mariners may do things, why they may not do things, why some of the pie in the sky ideas may be just that, some of the things that have been shifting, so on and so forth. But as you get the idea here, you see in the last few years, the last 4 seasons anyway, the Mariners have made significant moves at the deadline. 21, they traded Kendall Graveman, who was beloved in Seattle, for several players came in. Diego Castillo was a valuable reliever in 21 and 22 before moving on. 2022, that was a big one, right? Not only did they end the drought, but a big reason why they were able to get on that stretch run was trading for Luis Castillo from the Reds ahead of the deadline. And Rock is still just that, the Rock La Piedra of that rotation. So that was a big win. That was a buy move. 2023 wasn't exactly like a sell-off, so to speak, and the Mariners only finished 1 game out of the postseason, but they did trade their closer, Paul Sewald. Now, at the time, it maybe felt like a little bit of a sell because you were bringing in sort of prospects, so to speak, and guys like Dom Canzone, Josh Rojas, Ryan Bliss, and certainly Bliss was an opening day starter at second before season-ending injury. Canzone has been up and down, but, is actually hitting really well in June and early July. Josh Rojas is no longer with the team. Now, in the moment, though, you were trading Sewald, and that felt like a little bit of a sell, going to the Diamondbacks, who ended up going on that run to the World Series with Paul. But the reality is, you think about the Mariners closer situation right now, it's Andres Munoz. So, obviously the front office kind of foresaw that, knew that Mooney was going to make that jump, and that's part of why they made that move. Win or loss, well, that's for you to decide in any way you'd like. And then, of course, last year they bring Randy Arozarena aboard, everyday starter. You got to start him in left, and certainly lately has been red hot. As of this recording, he has 6 home runs in 7 days, so that's pretty darn good. And he certainly, if you remember that 24 deadline, was one of the more, if not the most sought after available talent that the Mariners could have acquired. And they got him at a pretty good price too. So that's what we're talking about this. It doesn't feel like if, but more like when, not just because of this scenario and where the Mariners stand right now in the last wild card spot, but because their track history and track record proves it. And so that all aside, okay, we've established the history. Now let's look at this year, because when you look at this year, it really feels like a win now. And certainly Mariners fans have been saying win now for a few years, and rightfully so. But you see the different things that have happened. You've missed the postseason by 1 game in each of the last 2 years after ending the drought. If you have started another drought by missing 3 in a row, if you've wasted another window of talent for that great rotation, that's an interesting thing. And let's be honest now, it is win now from the standpoint, like we saw that last year when Scott Service was let go in August, and Dan Wilson's done a pretty darn nice job. Sure. But if you fail again, some of that honest falls elsewhere, right? It's not the manager. If you're getting a similar result with a different guy, right? And so that may be another reason why it feels like the Mariners have to make a move. And certainly the track record proves it, right? Okay, so we've established now why we think the Mariners will be making a move. And at this point, you're thinking of the names, you've Googled it, you've talked about it, you've heard us talk, reporters talk about it. I'd like to throw out the caveat, the, incredibly talented Daniel Kramer, writes for MLB.com covering the M's, has stated that the Mariners ownership is willing to spend more. Now, that's something that they've always said, but I think it's significant that they're relaying that message out right now. because it shows a commitment. Actions will speak louder than word in time, but it shows a commitment to winning right now. So let's take a look who they might be able to bring aboard here. Again, these are names that are, brought up, talked about. And I think we're going to go over some of them here. And from the standpoint of looking at this saying, okay, this makes sense to me. And I'm not in Jerry and Justin's office. I've talked to them a bunch, but not specifically about this anyway, just yet. They can't really talk about that at the moment. But if it was me, I like the Ryan O'Hearn idea. Josh Naylor from Arizona, certainly his numbers are pretty darn close if you look over time and even this season. They're different players. Naylor has a little more pop to his bat, but O'Hearn has been reliable. The Orioles may be a little bit more willing to sell. 7.5 out of the wild card, even in last place in the AL East, a very stacked AL East, though, as of this recording. The Orioles also seem to fit nicely with the Mariners from a standpoint that they need some pitching. And so that could be an interesting match as far as a trade is concerned. And I think if you add Ryan O'Hearn, you're instantly talking about an upgrade, obviously offensively, a guy who's hitting over 300 and kind of consistently the last couple of years has been in that range. He'd instantly have the highest average. JP's hovering around 285, which isn't bad, but it's just, it was the point that if you acquire a guy like O'Hearn or even Naylor, they suddenly have the highest average on your team. There's a third list. I know that a third name on the list there that I know drew your attention. Eugenio Suarez. We can argue that trade, I don't even think it's an argument at this point, may have been the worst that we've seen in the last few years. I mentioned the lamenting of trading Kendall Graveman, and that wasn't good, but Eugenio was clearly a cost-cutting sort of thing and an effort to try and cut down on strikeouts, and it didn't work. And not only in the moment that we know it wasn't a good trade because Gino is the heart and soul a lot of times of that clubhouse. Other guys have gotten older and lead more. I mean, JP's always been a leader, but Cal's become a leader. Julio's more of a leader too, things like that. But Gino is just the fun, loving part of that clubhouse. And so certainly that's going to change the dynamic of things. And last year how it went, and third base wasn't exactly a spot that was, good. And here comes, from the stat perspective, Gino, top 10, even better than that at times this year in home run hitting. Okay. So that's a trade that Jerry, I'm sure again, understanding he had to make cost cutting moves, but would like to have back. And Eugenio could be available. Now that said, it seems to make too much sense. Bring him back to Seattle. Come on. He loved it here, but got to understand a lot of buyers right now. And in the expanded wild card age, there's a lot fewer teams that are straight up selling, and the Diamondbacks have played better baseball lately. I would still argue they're going to sell just from the standpoint of of where they stand and things of that nature. But the point is this, that as much as it feels like a slam dunk, you fill a spot at third that you could really use an upgrade, an established guy like Eugenio that we're all familiar with. Okay. But let's not call it a slam dunk just yet from a standpoint of whether or not it'll happen. I think it would be a slam dunk if it did happen, but that'll be the thing. So those are the three names that I think you can really focus on. Now, that's not to say there's pie in the sky ideas. Okay. We're throwing Ronald Acuna down there because there were some articles about that. Do I think it'll happen? No. Alex Bregman would be more likely, but all that said, it would cost a lot more, not just financially, but in what you would have to give up to get him. Okay. You're talking about some painful departures. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but we're talking about a Mariners team that has been very reluctant in that way, other than Gino, apparently, to give up those guys that they've had homegrown and things of that sort. So that'll be interesting to see. And there's not ruling out they make more than one move. From a standpoint, let's say you acquire Ryan O'Hearn and you do a prospect haul on that one, then you want to go after Bregman or Suarez. At that point, if you've acquired O'Hearn, you can move guys that have been manning those positions. Somebody like Luke Raley would be attractive because he's under the club control for a little while to come here. And he's got a lot of pop as we've seen the last couple seasons. Now, I'm not saying the Mariners are making a move to do that. I'm just saying as a hypothetical, so to speak, that's the sort of thing that can open up down the line, right? If you make more than one move here and more than one significant move here. So I would, listen, nothing's impossible. We know Jerry DePoto, Justin Hollander like to make those moves, but that's the idea here. These are some of the names you are going to see most frequently: O'Hearn, Naylor, Suarez, maybe some of the other guys. It would take a heck of a lot for folks like Acuna and Bregman, but you never know, because here is the deal, as we talked about a little while ago, from the standpoint that you got to win now if you're the Mariners. I mean, if you miss 3 in a row, I know we've seen it. Obviously, it was 21 in a row, 20 in a row, whatever, in Seattle. But like 3 in a row after making the playoffs with that rotation, that would be seen as a failure. It would be. And you hate to say it, and it would squander this superstar year for Cal Raleigh. It would squander how the rotation, yes, it's been battered, and because of that hasn't posted the otherworldly numbers that we've seen or expected maybe this year, but it's still been held together. You got an all-star in Brian Wu. And you're 6 games over 500, 2.5 game lead on the final wild card spot with a rotation that has seen injuries. Bryce Miller is still out. Logan Gilbert missed about 6 weeks. George Kirby was out just about as long. Okay, that's 3 of your 5 starters that have missed significant portions of time. As they all get healthy, we've seen how Kirby has looked really, really good his last couple outings. Logan looks as advertised now that he's gotten healthy, and hopefully Bryce is better soon in that regard as well. So the point here is this: the rotation's getting healthier. And suddenly the bats are warming up, right? Or Randy Arozarena, we talked about that. Even Donovan Solano looking pretty good lately, right? And obviously that's on top of Cal being Cal, JP being consistent, and, Julio's too good to not have an uptick at some point. Like, you're waiting on it. I know you all are. So all that considered, okay, the time feels like it's now. But you got to consider a few things here. The willingness to spend thing, I think, is important. Because, again, this has been a huge sticking point for fans. Like, you've seen this. We've talked about it. Is that really the thing? Like, we talked about, I think, a lot of fans looking at the Rafi Devers trade from Boston to the Giants and saying, well, shoot, the Mariners could have given a better package than what San Francisco did for somebody like Devers who can play third. Like, we need that. So why didn't they make the move? Well, here's the thing. I'm sure they kicked the tires on it. This is not to give anybody cover and that sort of thing. There's obviously something they didn't like about it, but that willingness to spend could be a part of it. And that willingness to spend, again, I'll re-explain this, goes more than one way. It's a financial thing, but it's also what you have to spend to acquire the player. You're talking about somebody like that. Let's say you have to give up a Bryce Miller, homegrown, under club control forever to go now. So young, electric. Last year was off the charts. That's a lot to give up. There's a lot of teams. Bryce Miller would probably be a number 2 on the Red Sox. You know what I'm saying? He's arguably the 5th starter with the Mariners. I've argued that Emerson Hancock, who has seen a lot of action, is essentially the Mariners' number 6. I would say he's a number 3 starter on most Major League Baseball teams. That's how good the Mariners' rotation is. It's a luxury that has been put to the test with those injuries this year. And we saw that. Emerson, Logan Evans, guys like that were pressed into multiple starts. And so if you had traded, say, Emerson Hancock or Bryce Miller or Logan Evans, something like that, you're kind of wondering where you would be if, somebody else goes down. So those are things to consider here. We talked about the guys heating up, Arozarena, Solano, and Canzone. How does that change the outlook? Well, I don't think it should change how you approach this. I think they need to be aggressive, and I think they need to acquire at least one of those names we just talked about. If one of these guys is not a Mariner by August 1, well, it depends on who else is. I would say I'd be a little bit disappointed, but that's also without the context of whatever else they may do. But I think if one of those guys is in a Mariner uniform by August 1, you should feel good about the commitment to winning right now. Okay, back to this. The wild card race. I've heard it said that, the Mariners are 7 games behind the Astros. Do you really want to sell the farm system out right now in order to just get to the wild card where you could be out in 2 games? To that, I say, what are you talking about? You play to win, right? And you're in a position to win. We've seen a lot of teams go from the wild card to the World Series in recent years. You just talked about Arizona. Philadelphia a few years before that. I didn't win the series, but the point is, could you imagine if the Mariners just went to the World Series? We'll take it. We want to win it, but you know what I'm saying? You're in the position. You got to strike while the iron's hot. And listen, they were in a position last year at the trade deadline when they acquired Arozarena where they had slid significantly. They had already given up more or less that 10-game lead to the Astros. It was pretty much done by then. And they still went out and bought. So I think they'll still buy. So I think that the wild card race, it just kind of, the Mariners being in that spot, and certainly it'll be different. They're 1 game behind the Yankees for the top spot right now, and they have 3 games with the Yankees this week. So certainly that'll look differently. Hopefully the Yankees will fall lower than the Mariners after it's all said and done. We'll let that all play out. Either way, I don't think it changes the approach. You're in the race. Make the moves you got to make. Logjam at catcher. And you know where I'm going with this. Okay, so let's talk about Harry Ford. Harry Ford is somebody that is going to be a star. He's tearing it up in Tacoma. By the way, go to Cheney Stadium if you have not been. Beautiful place. Awesome atmosphere. Love the Rainiers. Shout out to Riley on the announcing. But Harry Ford is going to be a star, okay? The Mariners have been touting him since they took him in the draft 4 years ago. Now, the problem becomes the obvious logjam at catcher. Now, I've heard it said that, maybe you move Cal to DH, or maybe Harry can play elsewhere or DH. And that could be true, but here's the problem. I know some people want to move Cal to DH, and he does DH on occasion to preserve him from injury and stuff. First of all, he's the toughest SOB I've ever seen. I mean, that one, I think it was 23, had like a broken hand for the last 2 months of the season, or broken finger, something in that. He was still catching with it. It was insane to think about. He's as tough as they come, but the other big, more important thing here is he calls such a good game. He is such a good manager behind the plate that I don't know that the Mariners would want to lose that, by, let's say you move up Harry Ford and he catches and Cal does more of a DH role, and on paper it's problem solved. But I don't know that the pitching staff stays exactly as dominant as they've been, and that's not a knock on Harry Ford. That's just how valuable Cal Raleigh is. So what do you do with Harry Ford then? Well, listen, you could promote him and try to platoon him a little bit in DH and outfield. I mean, they got to do something. He's ready. And when I say promote him, I know there was the call up, but like I'm saying, actually have him play significantly, right? And obviously Garver's in that kind of role too. And he's played better lately. Certainly Harry Ford has a brighter future with the franchise, so to speak. But that's where the idea, Harry Ford is stuck behind Cal. And, again, like you could put him in the outfield, but there's a lot of teams that would give up a lot of valuable assets for Harry Ford. And so that becomes the question. I think we talked about it before the season. You can move Harry and get some good assets. But do you want to give up somebody like that? That's going to be one of the most intriguing questions, because the reality here is this: the Mariners can acquire some of those major league ready talents that we showed you, established stars, by giving up prospects that are lower on the list than Harry Ford, right? And that's not a knock on those prospects. It's just kind of the reality of it. But that's one of the most interesting conundrums. Like, he's got to be promoted soon. You can't just keep him in Tacoma forever. There's a lot of people that would be willing to pay a premium price for Harry Ford. Do you risk trading him to, get somebody else? Or is it, like, this is why we draft these guys. This is why we develop them. Let's trade him as part of a package for Josh Naylor. And suddenly first base has got pop again, right? And Luke Raley can start every day in right field because he's more comfortable in the outfield, or he can DH, so that's some of the things to consider. Let's recap here. That's what we're considering with this. If you talk about it from, you look at it with, okay, the willingness to spend, how will it be impacted by guys that are playing hotter right now? The wild card race should mean you're still buying. And of course the catcher situation, but I'll say this. I feel like the untouchable guys are the Colt Emersons, the Johnny Farmellos, the Ty Peets. I don't think the Mariners want to trade anybody in the major league level, especially at pitching. Okay. But if they take one of the big swings and, I don't want to say misses, but if they take one of the big swings at some of the guys in the bottom here, well, then you're going to have to give up major league ready talent. That's why I think it's a lot more far-fetched anyway than some of the guys above that you can acquire in a prospect thing, especially a team like the Orioles that had such high expectations this year, and certainly have petered out a bit, and are going to lose O'Hearn anyways, most likely in the offseason. That would be my most likely acquisition if I'm a Mariner fan, to look for something for Ryan O'Hearn. And again, the history here, they have been pretty darn active at the deadline in recent years. I have no reason to suspect otherwise in 2025. Go for 5 in a row and that sort of thing. So there you have it. Mariners trade deadline primer. And certainly we'll revisit this as the deadline gets closer, as the Mariners make move. But I think it's really important to look at all things considered. Is it in our observing nature to be like, oh, wave a wand, bring that guy here? Justin Hollander told me in the past that sometimes a trade is as simple as calling, hey, we like this guy. Other GM says, oh, I like that guy. Oh, cool. Swap it. It could be 30 seconds. Sometimes it's months and months And there are certain guys that they had wanted, like Jorge Polanco was actually in the works for a long time when they acquired him from the Twins ahead of the 24 season. So I have no doubt that they have at least kicked the tires and talked about all those guys, maybe even people and players that we did not talk about. So buckle up. The Mariners track record says they will do something. Will it be a big splash? Will it be a Castillo or Rosarena type splash? Will it be something more measured? I'm going to find out over the next few weeks. Hey, let's see if they can get a really nice streak going. They're obviously riding a 3-game streak with that history made, sweeping the Pirates and not giving up a single run in 3 straight outings. They've not given up a run in 29 innings heading into Tuesday's matchup with the New York Yankees. We'll set a record if they can extend that at least a few innings in to that game in the Bronx coming up on Tuesday. So, hey, appreciate you guys. Certainly if they make the move, the big one, if there is a big one, big is a relative term in this trade deadline world. But we'll come back here on the KOMO News YouTube page. And, of course, we'll always give you coverage at KOMOnews.com and KOMO 4, 6, and 11 o'clock. Hey, everybody, thanks for going with us on this chat, and go M's.